Becky Mayer, and welcome to Transitions, Body, Mind, Spirit. Transitions, we all have so many transitions in our life. I like to use the metaphor of triathlons. That's something that I've been doing for about 11 years. And in a triathlon, first you swim, and then you have that transition to get on the bicycle, and then you transition again to run. And that is a great metaphor for our life. What are we doing in this part of our life and that part of our life as we are younger and get older and different things happen? So we have a transition expert today. Elizabeth Crook is our guest. And Elizabeth, welcome to Transitions.
Thanks, Becky. I'm glad to be here.
You are an amazing woman, and there are two things we're going to discuss on this show, and then we have a second show with her and her husband too. But you own Orchard, what do we call it? Orchard?
Advisors.
Advisors. Okay, and also you're going to talk about the second part of this, which is your book coming out, Finding Your Yippee.
Yippee.
Yippee, yes. But tell us about Orchard Advisors and what that is and strategic planning in the corporate world. Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, about 20 years ago, actually a little bit more, I started working with companies. I had worked with them before that because I knew how to make companies grow or how to help them grow. I had done that in Latin America, and I just loved doing it. It was very satisfying work. So when I came back to the States, I was working with a couple of companies, more than a couple, and two of them made me offers to join them. I joined one of them as an executive. And we were successful in raising venture capital, but I knew deep inside that what that company was about was not resonating with what was deep inside me. So I started, when I left, I said, I want to be part of helping companies be more successful in the broadest sense of that word. Not only make more money, have a bigger bottom line, but have a greater sense of satisfaction and fun, frankly, doing it.
Fun, yes, you're supposed to have fun in your life, right?
I think so.
Yes, and in your business.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So what we do now, and of course the way I work with companies has evolved over this time because I have learned all kinds of new things, and business itself is changing so rapidly. I mean, what we did and thought about 20 years ago is very different from what we do today. I mean, the whole landscape has changed. There was a time I used to laugh when we would do planning, and every company would have a section that just said technology. Oh, we got to do something about technology, but it lived in its own separate category. And what we know now is it's woven into everything.
Absolutely.
So that's just an example. So we help our clients really get very clear about where they're trying to go, how do they differentiate and position themselves, and what is that secret sauce that they have that helps them succeed in a very crowded marketplace. How do we build a team around that? And then how do we translate that big vision into what's going to happen in the next 90 days? Jack Welch, who was the famous CEO of General Electric, used to say you need a 10-year vision and 90 days. So because things change so much, the notion of long-range planning is in some ways out of date. And so this is about saying what are the sort of the structure and the bones of where we're going. What is our purpose? Why do we exist? What are our values as a company? And that will last, hopefully, the entire life of the company, but the other pieces will change as circumstances change. Some change faster, some change more slowly. But that's why when we work with clients, we're typically face-to-face with our executive teams every quarter and with sometimes every month.
Wow, and when you're face-to-face with the executive teams, is this all ages? Are they millennials? Are there baby boomers? Do you kind of get into that part? And also, how can you get a corporate climate from them and figure out, well, how do they hear what you're trying to help them direct?
Good question. Our clients range. I have worked with companies where there's no one in the room over 30.
Wow.
And so one of the things I have to just be mindful of is to not use metaphors or tell stories that are not going to make sense to them. So you can't talk about having a man on the moon goal, which for boomers, they remember when there was no man on the moon. But if you are a millennial or a Gen Xer, there's always been a man on the moon. So when we talk about a far-reaching goal, we have to say energy independence in a generation, or no fossil fuels in a generation. That would be a big, bold vision. So it's different language. And then certainly I work with boomers. I work with a lot of Gen Xers because there's no right age to grow a business. It really depends on the energy and the talents of the entrepreneur involved.
Well, I know in Nashville, I read the paper every day here in Nashville, Tennessee, and there's more and more talk about the Entrepreneur Center and this entrepreneur and money raised for, I just read the article about the technical world of music and how they're giving seed money. How does that connect with what you do?
Most of the companies I work with are highly entrepreneurial. I do not work with startups except in rare circumstances. I do have a startup client, but the CEO of that company I had worked with when he went from 40 to 80 million in revenues. So we had an existing relationship. He and his team were a skill team, and they already had funding. Fortunately, in Nashville, we have so many resources through the Entrepreneur Center that many entrepreneurs have that as an option. Most of my clients have at least 5 million in revenue, and many of them have considerably more than that.
And how do you get, I'm still curious on, there's all this talk about the Apples of the world and the corporate climate and all that, and you have to kind of delve in and figure what is, to help them, what is their vision if they're making widgets? What is your vision with your widgets? Or how do you do that?
Well, the first question is, why does this company exist? And for most companies, if you keep peeling back that and asking that question multiple times, why is that important? Well, then why is that important? Then people come up with a really grand vision. I just wrote an article for My Entrepreneur magazine that deals with exactly this point. And it's when we can feel connected to something larger than ourselves, something that really seems noble and mighty. So that's where we start. The next place we go is values. And of course, it's easy to say service, integrity, good to our customers, and those tend to be mom and apple pie kind of values, ones that could belong to anybody. And we challenge our clients to really go deeper, and we get at that by saying, let's describe, think about the people who, if you were starting over, you would say, I'm taking those people with me. And then we say, how do they behave? How do they act? Because those are really the values. Every company already has values, but what we want to do is make them explicit. And so, for example, I worked with a company a number of years ago, and one of their values was, be that person in the foxhole. And what they meant by that, you know, the foxhole was used during I think World War II or One.
Yeah.
And so the person you wanted in your foxhole was somebody who you could count on,
cover your back,
no matter what. And so they aspired, their value was, we want to be that reliable for our clients and for each other. So that says so much more than just customer service. And so as they begin to talk about how people behave, then the words come out. And once they can articulate what those actions are, then they have stories to tell. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And then we help them develop all kinds of ways to really keep those values alive in their business. Is that part of your interview process? Do you only hire people who you believe share those values? Do you get rid of the people who don't? Everybody's experienced that person in their office who they're great at their job, but nobody wants to work with them.
Right.
Because they're just sourpusses. And I call them terrorists because they will literally blow up your business. So if you are truly a values-driven company, if you have someone who is mean and ugly to everybody and difficult to work with, you probably have a value that they're not living. And so when you have the courage to get rid of that person, I worked with a company, very bright entrepreneur, very successful. You'd know the name. And he hired a young woman. Wow, she had a resume that you could hardly believe. She was the absolute expert. They brought her in from another location. They paid her top dollar, and she was like poison. The things she said would make your hair curl. And yet they kept her, oh, she's just so good. She's just so good. She knows more than anybody else. And recently, and finally they said, we just can't do this anymore. But it took them a couple of years. Recently I was having breakfast with this guy, and he said, you know, out of all the things in my life or mistakes I've made, he said one of the two biggest mistakes is that I kept that woman on so long. She was so detrimental to our organization.
Right, right. So he learned.
Right. So when they have the foundation of the purpose and the values, and then they practice those and they walk that talk, and it becomes part of their everyday language. And when they praise somebody, they do it in terms of a value. I really like the way you handle that customer complaint. It fits with our value of whatever that is, or a corrective one. You know, when you don't show up for work on time, it really is against our value of taking responsibility. And so and when people get it, it's like, oh, this is fantastic.
Wow. Well, a tributary of what you do, I know you said you have worked with people who are philanthropists, who have an incredible amount of money, who want to do good with it and need some kind of guidance. And that absolutely fascinates me. Everybody always thinks, well, people have money, they know, but like money can almost be a burden. What do you do with all this? I want to help people. Now, tell us how you do that with the philanthropists out there.
Well, one of the things that I started doing, when you think about strategy and strategic thinking, you're really thinking about strategy from a very high level. And it actually means from the general's point of view. Because the general sat on the hill and could not only get messages from the army that they were watching, but could also see if there was a storm coming or another, you know, the cavalry was coming or whatever. So when we think about strategic, it's that taking a whole lot of information into consideration.
The big picture.
Big picture.
Right.
And so people would come to me to work with them on what do I want to do next. And over the years, I developed a process for helping people get very clear about what that was and all of the criteria and characteristics that should inform that decision. And I do it with all of my CEOs before we start working together. What is this business? How does this business fit in with who you are in your life? So I had a client who actually invited me to go to Vancouver, and he had partnered with a very wealthy woman who had decided to use her fortune to make a difference in that part of the world. And so as a result of our work together, she encouraged other people to put their money to work sooner rather than later. She said, you know, the world needs the money now. And
good. Practical.
Practical.
Yeah.
And so as a result, I started working with people, not so much, it was really to help them get clear about what was the impact that they wanted to have in what particular areas. You know, is it art and education? Is it the land? Is it the environment? Is it children's issues? Whatever that was, because many people with a lot of money are very generous, and they're writing checks, and at some point they say, am I really making a difference? So what we do is help them narrow down. When I still work with a woman in Montana, and I said, you know, it sounds like you've got about 25 focus areas. And she said, that's not very focused, is it? And I said, well, you tell me. So we looked at all of the things that she was doing and helped her discern what were the things that were really most important to her. And then the key question is, what role do you want to play? She said, I don't want to be just a check writer.
She wanted to be involved.
Yes, and I said, so let's talk about what that would look like. And at the end of the day, that was she wanted to be an activist hag, was her description. And so now, 10 years later, she has had a huge impact on her area of the state. I was just with her, and we were actually taking some time to go skiing. But during that time, before we went back to do the planning, she was on the phone lobbying for a piece of legislation, which in fact got passed. So she was being that activist hag. She was being that convener and bringer together. She was making equity investments in small entrepreneurial operations because she wanted to have a vibrant rural economy where she was. So it's really rethinking, number one, your focus areas, your role, and some very creative strategies about how you can make an impact.
To do something. And are you allowed to say what her focus after 25 things, what it was the environment or animals, or what was it?
Hers was initially sound land management, vibrant rural economy, and really betting on people. What that has morphed into these days is really developing leadership and leadership capacity in her area, which there are significant rural parts, and especially in Native Americans, because there's a lot of, she herself lives on reservation land, and so she works on that.
And Native Americans have a history of, alcoholism, and just it's the social structure that has been decimated, and what a wonderful thing that she is trying to help that. That's a good thing.
So there are many things that she's active in.
Yeah, and you helped her focus.
Yes.
And do the plan, and I can understand not just writing checks.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course we brought in and worked with legal advisors and financial advisors. That's not my area of expertise. But in all these cases where there are big fortunes involved, all of that has to be considered because they're more or less advantageous ways from a tax point of view. There's certainly inheritance issues, there are trusts, there are all of that sort of thing. And we work closely with their advisors to make sure that our client is able to carry out his or her wishes in terms of what they want to have happen in the world.
That's wonderful. Now, to shift to the other subject, finding your Yippee, which is, tell us about that. And I know that you have blogs about that, and we also have 2 different websites that we're going to show at the end of the show. But tell us about that concept, finding your Yippee. And you have the book coming out, right?
Yes. Well, although we've decided to change the title, and I'll talk just a minute about that, but some years ago, actually a mutual friend of ours who's a lawyer came to me to help her think through some options in her career. And as we had spent some time doing a lot of other mapping things, but at the end of the day, I said, which one makes you want to jump up and say, yippee? And that was the first time I'd ever said it, and this was probably 15 years ago. So when a mentor of mine, and I'm writing a blog will go up tomorrow afternoon at Discover Your Yippee that tells the story, a mentor of mine said, just go ahead and write the book, because I'd never thought of writing the book. And so I've written this book that really journeys people from what's next in my life, how can I think bigger, how can I act smarter, how can I go deeper, how can I live richer in the sense of just more alive and live more richly. And I realized over the years that even though a number of people had said, I don't know about Yippee, I don't know about Yippee.
The wording of
yeah,
Yippee.
The Yippee, because Yippee sounds frivolous, and the work you're doing is not frivolous. It really is profound, and it is profound. I've seen it make immense changes in people. So you can still find us at Discover Your Yippee, and there is that sense of elation that I would hope everyone feels, but it is, we're looking for what that might be. Is it what's next? Is it, so we sent out a survey to get people's feedback about how do you describe this in a way that when people read it, they say, oh, that's what I want.
And do you have any potential other titles?
Well, it's been suggested what's next. Think bigger, act smarter. We've seen, I haven't read all of the survey results because I'm kind of waiting for them to collect. There are only 3 questions on it. And then we get to see, are people employed, not employed, retired, where they are in their life, or what position it is. So we get a sense of who's actually giving us that advice.
Well, I know that the humans are lasting a lot longer on this world, and they keep on predicting we're going to live to 80 or 90, and everybody in health, it seems to be on the forefront. And it seems that people, I know a lot of my friends personally, they have retired, like a friend of mine just retired yesterday from being an airline pilot. Okay, 58, he is still very viable. What's next? He doesn't know, And there are so many people that I am familiar with, and in their early 50s or 60s, that kind of, that decade in there, it's like, well, I've done this, and the kids are grown, don't have to worry about the kids, the grandkids aren't in the picture yet. What's next?
And that's what next can happen as early as the early 40s. I have people who come to me and say, I've been successful. I have this great job. They may not be head of their department or head of their company, but they're saying, I don't want that next step. I want something different. And A, I don't know what it is, and B, I don't know how to find it. Can you help me?
And you've had seminars involving a number of people together to kind of figure that out, and then you do one-on-one also?
I do. I do one-on-ones.
And do you have any seminars coming up?
We don't have any on the calendar now. We'll probably do one in the spring of 2016, about the time that we hope the book will come out. The book that is yet untitled, that will be a guide to bringing this richness in your life, really regardless of, and some people come because they want to stay where they are, but they just want to be more intentional. It's people who say, I have all this experience, I have all this knowledge, I have these talents, I've learned so much, how can I be really intentional about where I put it? It's not just, I started in this after college, but now it was kind of accidental. And now I want to be very intentional about what that is.
Right, and figuring it out. Yeah, wow. And then we're going to be having a second show, too, which will touch on your personal life more. And I want to make sure that we put a plug in for that on show number 2 also. But is there any other things that you want people to know about your 2 businesses, and also some knowledge, some wisdom, some hindsight on the people that trudge through misery? I know a lot of people who are in jobs and they just can't change. They just can't, they grip that job. What else would I do? I don't know how to do anything else. How can they unchain themselves from their own chains?
One of the things we focus on as much as anything is helping people identify their limiting beliefs.
Their beliefs, yes.
Because we make up all these rules, some of which may have been true at some point in our lives, some of which were never true. It was never true that going outside after you've taken a hot shower is going to give you a cold. But my grandmother told me that many times. The earth was never flat, but yet educated people believe that. And then sometimes things were true for somebody else, but they were never true for us. And one of the ways I have a lot of that conversation in my weekly blog. So discoveryouryippee.com is the current blog address. The other thing is I have a free video on the website, a 3-part video about how to love the work you have. It's really a way to begin thinking about how to make some shifts in what you do by understanding what are those activities and things that energize you, as well as how to have that conversation with your boss. So that's helpful for people who are employees. I think the main thing that I'd like to say is we are, I believe, made to give our gifts in the world, and the world needs them. And if everybody were living in a way that played off their gifts, we could change the world. But most of us don't think that our gifts, we say, anybody can do that. That's no big deal. And so a big part is embracing and having help in identifying what's really special about you, because we just want to deny how special we are. Or we think that what we have to do has to be perfect. And
the perfection thing really gets in the way.
Yeah.
I won't try this because I'm not perfect at it. I was talking to somebody just 2 days ago at the Country Music Marathon. I was watching, and I ran into a friend of mine who has done like 50 triathlons for charities. And he's totally not doing triathlons. He's doing another exercise thing. And he says, you know, I'm back to square one. I don't know what I'm doing. Everybody else knows what they're doing. And so I'm just learning all over again, you know. And I thought, great, good for you.
And
you know,
sometimes we just have to look.
Yeah.
We just have to look. And in some ways it sounds like, you know, when you're in junior high or high school, everybody thinks that everybody else has got it together. That
right.
everybody else feels
together,
confident. Yeah, and then when you go back to that reunion, you know, 20 years later, and you find out nobody had it together.
Right.
Everybody felt just as insecure as you did.
Right.
And so we're all kind of behind this mask thinking, oh my gosh, have they got the life? And so I want to give permission to people to experiment. And if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly until you figure out how to do it well.
Absolutely. I know my doing dancing lessons, it's really been tough trying to learn, but I've been working on it. It's a little different. So just having comfort and knowing that I'm not great at it, but I'm going to try something anyway.
Were you having fun at it?
Well, sometimes on the dance part, but I have a lot of fun. I personally definitely follow my Yippee. I have lots of Yippee moments in my work and what I do, and this is a Yippee moment also. And so I believe that have any last words of wisdom to our listening audience?
Well, I think you're such a great model of all the things that you've taken up. You didn't say, I'm too old, I'm too this, or not enough of that. And you really exemplify someone who has been incredibly graceful in making transitions.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Elizabeth Crook, our wonderful guest. Tune in to her 2 different websites and see what her next book will be renamed. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for being on our transition show. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.